sound of air raid sirens wailing across London, the distant thunder of V-1 rockets exploding in the night. June 2, 1944. Combined Operations Headquarters, Richmond Terrace, London. 0347 hours. The war would be won or lost in 4 days, and it all depended on a lie. I found these documents in a sealed vault beneath the old War Office building, marked Bigot Ultra Secret, Eyes Only. The handwriting belongs to General William Harland, a name erased from official histories, a man who never existed according to the records. But his confession tells a different story. Close-up of typewritten pages, some sections blacked out by censors. Harland's voice reading from his confession. Today I ordered the death of 17 good men to maintain an illusion. They died believing they were conducting a reconnaissance mission. They died because my lie required their sacrifice. God forgive me, it won't be the last time. This is the story of Operation Fortitude, not the sanitized version in the history books, but the real one. The story of how the greatest military deception in human history was built on a foundation of moral decay, brilliant strategy, and the systematic destruction of one man's conscience. The official records show that Allied deception operations confused German high command about the timing and location of D-Day. What they don't show is the human cost of maintaining that deception. This is the story of the man who lied so convincingly that he saved 100,000 lives and lost his soul in the process. But every war story begins the same way, with the moment everything changes forever. March 15, 1944. Brigadier General William Harland descended into the depths of the Churchill War Rooms, his polished boots clicking against concrete floors that had been poured in desperate haste 4 years earlier. At 47, he was older than most field commanders, his face bearing the permanent tension lines of a man who fought wars with maps and radio signals instead of rifles and grenades. The briefing room was thick with cigarette smoke and the weight of impossible decisions. Around the mahogany table sat the architects of what would become the largest military operation in human history, and the most elaborate lie ever told. Colonel David Strangeways of the London Controlling Section stood at a wall-mounted map of Europe, red pins marking German divisions like drops of blood across the continent. Gentlemen, the Germans have 58 divisions in France. Rommel expects us at Calais, it's the logical choice, the shortest route across the Channel. Air Chief Marshal Sir Trafford Leigh-Mallory tapped ash from his cigarette. Which is precisely why we're landing at Normandy. But that only works if Rommel keeps his reserves at Calais, waiting for an invasion that will never come. General Omar Bradley, his American accent cutting through the British formality, leaned forward. How do we convince the smartest military minds in Germany that we're stupid enough to attack their strongest defenses? That's when all eyes turned to Harland. 3 months earlier, he'd been transferred from the Pacific Theater, where his unorthodox intelligence operations had contributed to American victories at Guadalcanal and the Marshall Islands. His specialty was psychological warfare, understanding not just what the enemy knew, but what they believed. We don't convince them we're stupid, Harland said quietly, studying the map. We convince them we're exactly who they think we are, predictable, methodical, and obvious. We give them the invasion they expect, right where they expect it. Strangeways frowned. But we're not invading Calais. No, Harland replied, a slight smile playing at the corners of his mouth. But the 1st United States Army Group is. The room fell silent except for the distant rumble of London traffic far above their heads. The 1st United States Army Group doesn't exist, Bradley said slowly. Not yet, Harland confirmed. But it will. Complete with radio traffic, supply depots, field hospitals, and a commander the Germans already fear, General George S. Patton himself. What followed was 3 hours of the most audacious military planning in modern warfare. They would create an entire army out of nothing, inflatable tanks, wooden aircraft, fake radio transmissions, and carefully orchestrated intelligence leaks. The fictional Fusag would be larger than the actual invasion force, positioned directly across from Calais, commanded by America's most aggressive general. But as the meeting progressed, Harland began to understand the true cost of their deception. It wouldn't be enough to create fake armies and phantom divisions. They would need to sacrifice real operations, real soldiers, real lives to maintain the illusion. April 3, 1944. Dover, England. The construction had begun in earnest. From the air, the fields of Kent looked like staging areas for the largest military operation in history. Hundreds of tanks, artillery pieces, landing craft, and supply vehicles filled every available space. German reconnaissance flights photographed them daily, radio intercepts confirmed massive troop movements, and intelligence reports painted a picture of Allied preparations that made German commanders increasingly nervous. The reality was far different. Major Robert Hesketh, Harland's deputy, walked through the inflatable tank park with a mixture of pride and unease. "The Germans have photographed this sector 17 times in the past week," he reported. "Their analysis shows armor concentrations consistent with 3 full divisions." Harland nodded, studying the elaborate fake installations through binoculars. In the distance, genuine-looking radar installations swept the horizon, their signals carefully calibrated to suggest defensive preparations for a major port operation. "What about the radio traffic?" Harland asked. "Sergeant Williams has been brilliant," Hesketh replied. "His team is generating communication patterns for 12,000 men using only 43 radio operators. Supply requisitions, training schedules, leave requests, everything you'd expect from a real army." But it was the human element that made the deception truly convincing. Patton himself had been briefed on his role as commander of the fictional army group. The general, famous for his aggressive tactics and controversial statements, played his part perfectly, making public appearances in Dover, being photographed inspecting the fake installations, even delivering speeches to non-existent troops. The performance required constant attention to detail. When German spies reported unusual activity near Calais, Allied intelligence would leak information about training exercises. When Luftwaffe reconnaissance flights were detected, radio operators would increase traffic to suggest heightened alert status. But maintaining the lie required more than theatrical props and radio games. April 18, 1944. AF Northolt. 2,130 hours. Flight Lieutenant James Whitmore adjusted his oxygen mask as his Supermarine Spitfire climbed into the darkness above the English countryside. Below, the blackout made England invisible except for the occasional glint of moonlight on water. Whitmore didn't know he was about to die for a lie. His mission was listed as Reconnaissance Patrol, Shipping Movements, Dover-Calais Corridor. In reality, it was theater. The Germans needed to see regular Allied air activity over the Strait of Dover, consistent with preparations for a major amphibious assault. Whitmore's flight of 4 Spitfires would be intercepted by Luftwaffe fighters, photographed by German reconnaissance aircraft, and reported to intelligence analysts who would add the sighting to their growing file of evidence pointing to an Allied invasion at Calais. What Whitmore didn't know, what Harland had specifically ordered withheld from the mission briefing, was that German radar operators had been tracking unusual Allied flight patterns for 3 days. Luftwaffe Command had positioned a full swarm of Focke-Wulf 190s directly in Whitmore's flight path. In the bunker beneath Richmond Terrace, Harland listened to radio intercepts of the engagement. German voices, calm and professional, reporting contact with 4 enemy fighters, Vector 270, altitude 8,000 meters. The fight lasted 11 minutes. Whitmore's wingman, Pilot Officer David Chen, managed to return to base with his engine smoking and half his tail shot away. The other 3 pilots died in the cold waters of the English Channel, their aircraft marked as training casualties in official records. That night, Harland wrote in his private journal, "Today I sent 3 boys to die so that German intelligence would believe our phantom army is real. They died protecting a lie I created, advancing an operation they knew nothing about. Their families will receive letters explaining that they died in service to their country. The truth is, they died in service to my strategy." But the sacrifice worked. German intelligence reports the next day noted increased Allied air activity over Dover, consistent with pre-invasion reconnaissance patterns. The weight of evidence pointing to Calais as the invasion target grew stronger. The master manipulator *. May 8, 1944. Combined Operations Headquarters. The deception operation had expanded beyond anything Harland had originally envisioned. What had begun as a simple misdirection about invasion targets had evolved into a comprehensive program of strategic manipulation that touched every aspect of Allied planning. Agent Garbo, Juan Pujol Garcia, a Spanish double agent working for British intelligence, sat across from Harland in a secure briefing room, his reports spread across the table like playing cards in a deadly game of poker. "The Germans trust my network completely now," Garbo explained in accented English. "I have convinced them that I control 27 sub-agents across Britain. They believe my reports about troop movements, supply build-ups, training exercises." Harland studied the latest batch of intelligence reports that Garbo would transmit to his German handlers. Each one was carefully crafted to reinforce the illusion of Allied preparations for an invasion at Calais. "What about the timing?" Harland asked. "I will tell them that Fusag is not ready until July," Garbo replied. "That the invasion will come in 2 phases, a diversionary attack somewhere else, followed by the main assault at Calais." The beauty of the plan was its psychological sophistication. Rather than simply lying about Allied intentions, they were creating a narrative that confirmed German preconceptions. Every piece of false intelligence felt logical, inevitable, true. But as the deception grew more complex, so did its moral weight. Colonel Strangeways entered the briefing room with news that made Harland's stomach tighten. "The Germans are moving the 15th Army to Calais. 7 divisions, including 2 panzer divisions. Our deception is working, they're concentrating exactly where we want them." "That's good news," Garbo said. "Yes," Harland replied quietly. "But it also means that every day we delay the real invasion, more German reinforcements arrive in Normandy. Every day our lie succeeds, the actual D-Day becomes more costly." The mathematics of deception were brutal. Every German division that remained at Calais waiting for the phantom invasion was a division that wouldn't be defending the beaches of Normandy. But every day the deception continued, German commanders had more time to strengthen their Atlantic wall defenses, lay more mines, position more artillery. Harland was saving lives by sacrificing lives, winning battles by ensuring that other battles would be more deadly. If you're still here, you're one of the few who seek the untold truths of war. So hit subscribe, and never miss what history tried to bury at *. Sound of rain against windows, muffled conversations, the constant background noise of a military headquarters under pressure. May 25, 1944. 11 days before D-Day. Harland stood alone in his office, studying intelligence reports that painted an increasingly clear picture of German defensive preparations. The deception was working perfectly, too perfectly. German forces remained concentrated at Calais, but their intelligence services had also begun to suspect that Allied invasion preparations were more advanced than previously believed. The phone rang. Harland recognized the voice immediately, General Dwight D. Eisenhower, Supreme Allied Commander. "Bill, I need to know if we can maintain operational security for 11 more days," Eisenhower said without preamble. "German radio intercepts suggest they are beginning to suspect the timing of our operation." Harland closed his eyes. This was the moment he'd been dreading, the moment when maintaining the lie would require an even greater sacrifice. "We can maintain it," he replied. "But it will cost us." "How much?" "Operation Copperhead, the Montgomery Double, needs to be activated immediately. He needs to be seen in Gibraltar, meeting with Mediterranean commanders. The Germans need to believe that Montgomery is planning operations in southern France, not northern France. That's already approved. What else?" Harland took a breath. "We need to sacrifice the 2nd Ranger Battalion's reconnaissance mission at Point du Hoc. If they conduct their planned rehearsal, German intelligence will identify the target and realize we're planning to assault the Normandy coast. The silence on the other end of the line stretched for nearly 30 seconds. Those men are specifically trained for that mission, Eisenhower said finally. Without the rehearsal, their casualties on D-Day will be significantly higher. Yes, sir. But if they conduct the rehearsal, German intelligence will identify Point du Hoc as a priority target and realize that our actual invasion site is Normandy, not Calais. The entire deception collapses. Another long pause. How many men are we talking about? The rehearsal would involve 225 Rangers. Without it, I estimate their casualties on D-Day will increase by 30 to 40%. Eisenhower's voice was barely audible. And if the deception fails? If the deception fails, the Germans move their reserves from Calais to Normandy. Instead of facing 34,000 defenders on D-Day, we face 58,000. Casualties for the entire invasion could exceed 50,000 in the first 24 hours. The mathematics were clear, brutal, and inescapable. Sacrifice 200 Rangers to save 10,000 Allied soldiers. Do it, Eisenhower said, and the line went dead. That night, Harland wrote in his journal, "I have become a calculator of death, weighing lives against other lives, measuring sacrifice against victory. The 2nd Rangers will assault Point du Hoc without adequate preparation because my deception requires their blood. I tell myself it's for the greater good. I tell myself that saving thousands justifies sacrificing dozens. But tonight, I dream of their faces, and I wonder if victory built on such calculations can ever truly be called victory at all." Asterisk the final gamble asterisk. Sound of urgent radio traffic, multiple conversations, growing tension. June 4, 1944. D-Day -2. The weather was deteriorating rapidly. High winds and heavy seas had forced Eisenhower to postpone the invasion by 24 hours, but the delay created new problems for the deception operation. Every additional day increased the risk that German intelligence would penetrate their carefully constructed lies. Harland stood in the communication center, listening to radio intercepts from German headquarters. Field Marshal Erwin Rommel had returned to Germany for his wife's birthday, confident that weather conditions made an Allied invasion impossible for at least a week. But other German commanders were growing suspicious of Allied radio activity and troop movements. Colonel Strangeways approached with the latest intelligence assessment. Ultra-intercepts show that German High Command is beginning to question the concentration of forces at Calais. Admiral Canaris suspects that our radio traffic might be deceptive. What's their conclusion? Harland asked. They're debating whether to redistribute the 15th Army. If they move those divisions to Normandy. Harland nodded grimly. After months of perfect deception, they were running out of time. The lie that had protected Allied invasion preparations was beginning to unravel just as the real invasion was about to begin. The solution came from an unexpected source. Agent Garbo requested an emergency meeting, his face tense with excitement and fear. "I have received new instructions from German intelligence," he reported. "They want me to confirm the timing of the Allied invasion. They suspect it will come within days, but they need to know exactly when and where." Harland studied the Spanish double agent carefully. This was the moment when their entire deception operation would either succeed completely or fail catastrophically. "What will you tell them?" Harland asked. "The truth," Garbo replied. "I will tell them that the Allies are invading Normandy on June 6. The room fell silent. Strangeways looked as if he'd been shot. "But I will tell them 3 hours too late," Garbo continued. "My message will arrive after the invasion has already begun. The Germans will see that I discovered the real plan, but couldn't warn them in time. This will confirm my credibility for the most important lie of all. Which is that Normandy is the diversion. That the real invasion, the main assault by the 1st United States Army Group under General Patton, is still coming at Calais." It was audacious beyond belief. By telling the Germans the truth about D-Day after it was too late to matter, they would establish credibility for the ultimate lie, that the largest amphibious invasion in history was actually a feint designed to draw German reserves away from the real invasion site. D-Day *. Sound of aircraft engines, distant explosions, radio traffic. June 6, 1944. 0630 hours. Harland stood on the roof of the Combined Operations Building, watching formations of Allied aircraft heading south toward France. In the distance, the Thames reflected the grey morning light, carrying barges and small craft that had been requisitioned for the invasion. Below, in the operations center, radio operators maintained the fiction of the 1st United States Army Group. Messages flew between phantom headquarters, confirming supply schedules for non-existent divisions, reporting readiness status for imaginary regiments. The real invasion was underway. On the beaches of Normandy, men were dying to establish the foothold that would ultimately liberate Europe. And at Calais, German divisions waited for an invasion that would never come. At 0847 hours, Agent Garbo transmitted his message to German intelligence: urgent. Have confirmed through sub-agent network that Allied forces are conducting major amphibious assault at Normandy beaches. Estimate minimum 3 divisions involved. This appears to be diversionary operation designed to draw reserves from Calais sector. Recommend German forces at Calais maintain positions pending main assault by 1st United States Army Group. The message was received by German intelligence at 0851 hours, nearly 3 hours after the invasion had begun, exactly as planned. But as reports began filtering back from Normandy, Harland realized the true cost of his deception. The 2nd Ranger Battalion, denied their crucial rehearsal to maintain operational security, had suffered horrific casualties at Point du Hoc. Of the 225 men who landed at the base of the cliffs, only 90 remained combat effective by nightfall. Captain James L. Rudder, commander of the 2nd Rangers, would later write in his action report, "The absence of adequate reconnaissance and rehearsal time resulted in tactical problems that could have been avoided." However, the mission was accomplished and the German artillery positions were destroyed. Harland read that report 3 days later and added his own note to the file: mission accomplished. Acceptable casualties for strategic objectives achieved. But his private journal told a different story. "Today I watched young Americans die because my lies required their sacrifice. They scaled impossible cliffs and charged into machine gun fire to maintain an illusion. History will remember D-Day as a glorious victory. I will remember it as the day I realized that victory and virtue are not the same thing." The unraveling conscience *. Sound of celebration in distant rooms, but silence in Harland's office. June 20, 1944. 2 weeks after D-Day. The invasion had succeeded beyond all expectations. Allied forces had established a secure beachhead in Normandy and were advancing inland against German resistance that was fierce but not overwhelming. Most importantly, German reserves remained concentrated at Calais, still waiting for Patton's Phantom Army Group to launch the real invasion. But success brought no peace to Harland. Major Hesketh entered his office with the latest intelligence reports. The Germans still believe Fusag is preparing to invade Calais. They're maintaining 7 divisions there, including 2 panzer divisions that could otherwise be reinforcing Normandy. Good, Harland replied automatically, but his voice lacked conviction. "Sir, are you all right? You look—" "I look like a man who's been lying professionally for 4 months, Harland interrupted. "Tell me, Major, do you ever wonder what happens to people who make deception their profession? What happens to their souls?" Hesketh was quiet for a moment. "I think we do what's necessary to win the war, sir. And then we try to live with the consequences." "The consequences?" Harland turned to stare out the window at London streets, where civilians went about their daily lives, unaware of the moral complexities of their liberation. "Do you know how many Allied soldiers died on D-Day because of decisions I made to maintain this deception?" "Sir, the invasion succeeded. Casualties were lower than projected." "Overall casualties, yes. But specific casualties, Rangers at Point du Hoc, paratroopers who dropped into flooded areas because we couldn't reveal that we knew about German defensive preparations, pilots who died in diversionary missions to maintain the illusion of our fake armies. Those casualties were directly caused by my lies. Harland opened his desk drawer and pulled out a folder marked Personal Effects, Deceased Personnel. Flight Lieutenant James Whitmore, 23 years old. Shot down during a fake reconnaissance mission designed to convince German intelligence that we were planning to invade Calais. His mother thinks he died in service to his country. The truth is, he died in service to my deception. He turned another page. Captain Michael Harrison, 82nd Airborne. Killed when his transport aircraft was diverted from its planned route to avoid revealing our actual drop zones to German observers. His wife received a letter explaining that he died fighting for freedom. The truth is, he died because maintaining my lie was more important than his life. Hesketh shifted uncomfortably. Sir, those men died to save thousands of other lives. The deception worked. The invasion succeeded. Yes, Harland said quietly. It worked. We lied so convincingly that we saved countless lives by sacrificing specific lives. We won the war by losing our souls. And the worst part is, I'm not even sure I regret it. Asterisk the final deception asterisk. Sound of typing, filing cabinets closing, documents being sealed. August 15, 1944. Paris had been liberated. The German army was in full retreat across France. The war in Europe would continue for another 9 months, but the outcome was no longer in doubt. In a secure office beneath Whitehall, Harland supervised the destruction of Operation Fortitude's most sensitive documents. The fake radio logs, the intelligence assessments, the detailed records of how they had created entire armies from nothing, all of it was being classified at the highest levels or destroyed entirely. The official history would record that Allied deception operations had confused German intelligence about the timing and location of D-Day. The methods would be described in general terms, the results quantified in divisions misdirected and casualties avoided. But the human cost, the individual decisions, the specific sacrifices, the moral compromises that had made the deception possible, those stories would be buried as deeply as the documents that contained them. Colonel Strangeways approached Harland with the final batch of files. Everything classified Bigot Ultra or higher is being transferred to permanent storage. Access restricted to those with direct operational need. And my personal records? Harland asked. Your confession? Your private journal? Those are being sealed for 50 years minimum. Possibly permanently. Harland nodded. It was appropriate, somehow. The man who had built his career on lies would have his own truth hidden from history. What will you do now? Strangeways asked. Harland was quiet for a moment, listening to the sounds of London traffic far above, ordinary people living ordinary lives, unaware of the extraordinary moral complexities that had secured their freedom. I think I'll try to remember what it feels like to tell the truth, he said finally. Though I'm not sure I'll recognize it anymore. Asterisk the hidden truth asterisk. General William Harland returned to the United States in September 1944, carrying commendations from 3 governments and secrets that would never be revealed. He was offered positions in the newly formed Central Intelligence Agency, teaching posts at West Point, consulting roles with defense contractors. He declined them all. Instead, he bought a small farm in rural Virginia, where he spent the remaining 37 years of his life growing vegetables and raising horses. He never married, never spoke publicly about his wartime service, never wrote memoirs or gave interviews. His neighbors knew him as a quiet man who occasionally helped local families with financial difficulties, who donated anonymously to veterans organizations, who seemed to carry some invisible weight that never quite left his shoulders. When he died in 1981, his will directed that his personal papers be donated to the National Archives, but sealed for another 50 years. The reason, according to his attorney, was that the full truth of certain wartime operations might still cause harm to living persons. The truth was simpler and darker. Harland had spent nearly 4 decades trying to reconcile the mathematics of his wartime decisions, weighing specific lives against statistical lives, individual deaths against strategic victories, personal morality against collective survival. His final journal entry, written 3 days before his death, revealed the burden he had carried for 37 years. "I have lived long enough to see the children and grandchildren of the men I saved through deception. I have also lived long enough to understand that the men I sacrificed for that deception had children and grandchildren too, lives that were never lived, stories that were never told, love that was never shared. History will judge Operation Fortitude a brilliant success. God, I suspect, will judge it differently." The legacy of lies. Today, Operation Fortitude is studied in military academies around the world as a masterpiece of strategic deception. The phantom armies, the fake radio traffic, the careful manipulation of enemy intelligence, all of it is taught as an example of how creative thinking and psychological warfare can achieve victory at minimal cost. But the deeper questions, the moral weight of sacrificing specific lives for strategic objectives, the long-term psychological cost of professional deception, the ethical implications of victory achieved through systematic lying, those questions are rarely addressed in the textbooks. Perhaps that's as it should be. War, by its very nature, forces impossible choices. The luxury of moral purity is available only to those who are not responsible for the lives of others. But in a world where information warfare has become as important as traditional military operations, where strategic deception is conducted not just by military professionals but by civilian leaders, where the line between necessary lies and destructive falsehoods grows increasingly blurred, the story of William Harland offers a cautionary tale. Victory achieved through deception may be victory nonetheless. But it comes at a cost that extends far beyond battlefield casualties. It comes at the cost of the deceivers themselves, the individuals who sacrifice their own moral clarity to secure collective survival. The men and women who lie professionally for their countries often carry those lies long after the war's end. They become experts in deception, masters of manipulation, architects of illusion. And sometimes, in the quiet moments of their later lives, they wonder if they remember how to recognize truth anymore. Sound fades to silence, broken only by the distant echo of footsteps on empty floors. War doesn't end when the guns fall silent. It ends when the last story is told. Final silence. And perhaps the most important stories are the ones we choose never to tell, the truths too complex for heroes and villains, too morally ambiguous for clean historical narratives, too human for the mythology of war. General William Harland saved countless lives through strategic deception. He also sacrificed his own soul in the process. History remembers the victory. God alone knows the price.